In this video, we will deep dive into lesbian representation and FF ships in fandom communities. While queer fandom spaces are populated by a majority of bisexual women, ships between women are barely existing. To truly understand why this is, we have to understand historical and contemporary lesbophobia and how this has affected both popular culture and fandom. But is FF so unpopular as the discourse sometimes paints it out to be, or can we, if we look, see positive and lesbian waves arising in fandoms today? Hi and welcome to Obviously Queer with me, Katja. This video started as a simple fandom exploration, but as many of my videos do, it broadened out to a large discussion about historical homophobia and good representation. To structure this, I've divided this video into chapters. A brief outline of queerness in fandoms, lesbophobia, popular culture and fandoms, the evil/dead lesbian, lesbian sexualization and infantilization, is there hope for FF in fandoms, the aggressive lesbian and good representation, the importance of non-canon lesbians, and a summary and final discussion. A brief outline of queerness in fandoms. Fandoms have several platforms, such as Reddit, Twitter and TikTok, but in this video I'm talking about queer representation and queer fandom spaces. And the whole alphabet mafia consuming queer media, they are on Tumblr, an archive of our own. And now we will deep dive into statistics, but stay with me, it's extremely interesting.
Look at this graph!
Archive of Our Own, also known as AO3, is the largest site for fanfiction. Archive of Our Own is the 100 most visited site in the world. It's the 57th most visited site in the US with billions and billions of visits per year. So while AO3 is quite new, it's still a very useful and interesting site to look at when you want to look at statistics regarding fandoms. Especially if you want to discuss contemporary fandom spaces, which will be my focus today. User Centreoftheselights has since 2013 taken out statistics for AO3, the most popular ships per year and the most popular ships of all time. The top 100 list for ships through all time holds little surprises. 66% is MM or slash as it's also called, 14% are heterosexual, 13% are general, so friendships or non-romantic pairings, and 5% are FF or Femslash. The popularity of MM in fandoms have a long history, dating back to the 1960s obsession with Kirk/Spock. Fanfiction hasn't always been this queer, but it has always been a space dominated by women. And that, together with the overrepresentation of male characters in popular franchises, has been the general explanation for this uneven distribution of pairings. Simply, straight women enjoy fanfiction, and straight women want to read about men bagging. But it's not really that easy. Lauren Rose and Mel Stanfill of University of Central Florida did a survey in 2022 of fanfiction users, with the result that 53% identify as cis women, but 13% identify as non-binary, and the rest identify as other gender identities, also not cis. So 53% cis women and 41% trans people. Out of these, 86% identify as some kind of gay, sexuality-wise. So 14% are straight, out of these 50% women and 40% trans people. With the possibilities to do polls on Tumblr, users has made their own statistical surveys. According to this poll with 66,500 votes, 91% of Tumblr users are some kind of queer. According to this poll with 116,200 votes, 89% are LGBTQ. You can say whatever about the correctness of Tumblr polls, and I could counterpoint with more and more polls about the identity of these queer fandom spaces. They're not straight, and many of them do not identify as women. So the pre-existing idea that straight women enjoy fanfiction and women want to read about men banging is incorrect. It's actually queers enjoy fanfiction and queers want to read about men banging. The latest growth of in popular culture can be explained by its large demographic. Straight women and gay men. And this is true. But if we look at the popularity of in fandom spaces, we see that demographic, gay men and straight women, are actually underrepresented. I made a whole video about the popularity of which I highly recommend watching. In this video, I want to focus on another aspect, why people dislike FF. Because the reasons to why FF is unpopular isn't necessarily the same reasons to why is popular. In the comment field of the mentioned video and in discussions online, people often lift the fact that lesbian representation feels sexualized, are killed, or the show gets cancelled. Or, which was a very common comment, it just doesn't feel as well written. And sure, there is an element of internalized misogyny again, in especially the comments about quality, but it makes you wonder. Doesn't a lot of lesbian representation feel kind of boring? Is that also because I hate women or other aspects? Lesbophobia, popular culture, and fandoms. This is not a historical video. I won't account for all cinematic lesbian history. But if we are to talk about representation and fandom culture in present day, we have to do so with a basic knowledge of Sapphic cinematic representation, especially, depressingly enough, the negative aspects. The evil dead lesbian. The title of this chapter is taken from academic Liz Millwood's book, Killing of the Lesbians. The evil/dead lesbian is a self-explanatory name of the trope that Sapphic representation fell into in the early and mid-1900s. We can, to some extent, say this trope started in the 1930s when Hollywood implemented the Hays Code on all film productions. The Hays Code was a set of rules that, among other things, forbid the portrayal of sex perversion, which meant homosexuality. It was okay to imply homosexuality, though, if the characters were clearly punished for their homosexual actions, villainized or killed, usually both. Lesbian women during the Hays Code were therefore often portrayed as women out to destroy the morals of the good Christian girl. They were creepy, predatory, and often killed anyway. The Hays Code had a major impact on film. While cinema quite quickly understood that the sexy lesbians were more profitable than predatory older women, one trope especially remained: the dead lesbian. A trope today more known as bury or gaze. According to academic Michaela Johnson in the essay From Dead to Femme, there were 193 shows with Sapphic representation between 1976 and 2016 in American TV. So that's after the deletion of the Hays Code. In these 193 shows, 68 lesbians were killed off. This slaughter of lesbian characters, of course, also played a role in fandom communities. Two of the biggest FF fandoms historically, Willow Tara in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Claire Lexa in The 100, suffered this fate. When Lexa was killed, it caused an uproar due to its enormous backlash. The death of Lexa did change the portrayals of lesbians in popular culture. The trope of killing your lesbian drastically decreased after The 100. But it's still around. Just last year, the popular and canon pairing of Eve and Villanelle, I can't say that, in Killing Eve got the same treatment. Death for shock value. Like, lesbian characters dying isn't forbidden. Deaths can serve a narrative purpose, or sometimes dykes die because all characters die. Neither of those kinds of deaths are problematic. But death for shock value is always sloppy writing. And when it happens to lesbian characters, it feels extra trashy, since lesbians have a long history of being killed off as a moral punishment. Today we are experiencing another type of lesbian burying ceremony: cancellations. Media is in a period of high competition. As a result, TV shows are being cancelled at a very quick pace. This has affected, in a very high percentage, Sapphic media, like First Kill, Gentleman Jack, Warrior Nun, and A League of Our Own. According to Independent magazine, a third of all queer characters will disappear next year. The majority of these, 140 out of 175 are due to cancellations. According to Autostraddle, about 20%, so a fifth, of all TV shows with sapphic women or trans women are cancelled after one season. So that's not even including shows like Warrior Nun or Gentleman Jack, who got cancelled after 2 seasons. So fans are tired, and that's valid. It's harder to keep a fandom thriving after the source material has ended if the ending you received felt unfair, frustrating, and crushed the couple. And this was just a backstory to what I actually wanted to focus on when it comes to lesbophobia, popular culture, and fandoms today. Lesbians, sexualization, and infantilization. When people think about lesbian representation and problematic takes, I think what often comes to mind is sexualization. We know the stereotypical way of portraying women in film and TV, the male gaze. When discussing lesbians, we can't forget the most basic fact. They are still women. I would say it had a kind of peak in the early 2000s. Girl on girl was just the right amount of shocking, but still predominantly hot.
Oh, no. No more offers. You can't offer anything to us.
Let us keep the apartment. And as a thank you, Rachel and I will kiss for 1 minute.
Totally worth it.
With the fourth wave of feminism in the 2010s, this also decreased. But by looking at, for example, the Ultimatum Queer Love from 2023, we can see how this way of portraying lesbians still remains. In this specific sapphic season, the viewers were allowed in on much more bedroom footage than the other straight seasons, who basically featured none. But the sexualization of lesbians in popular culture today isn't as on the nose, and the mentioned villainized and dead lesbian is avoided. These tropes have gotten so much critique that creators try to dodge them instead, and because of that, sapphic media often fall into another trap. I call this lesbian infantilization. Let's skip to reality for a while. Today in Western society, where I live and thrive, lesbians are often sexualized or infantilized, made sexless. You may think that these two are contradictory, but they're not. They are rooted in the same problem, that in the eyes of society there is no sexuality without male sexuality. Lesbian desire therefore arises in the presence of men, sexualization, or is deleted in the lack of it, infantilization. With the entry of Christianity into Europe, and then with Christian missionaries into the world, sodomy laws made its big debut. Now you're like, am I watching an amateur history channel? I just wanted to hear about Tumblrinas wanking to Dean. Well, it's connected. It's all connected. Sodomy is the crime of sexual acts that go against the laws of nature. But historically, this has been sexual acts of penetration that goes against the laws of nature. Which means that men were sentenced, since women can't penetrate. It happened. But when women got sentenced for sodomy, way back, it was in combination with other sentences. They were sentenced as being hermaphrodites and for adapting male sexualities. In this way, by erasing their identities as women, their sexual acts with other women could be sentenced as sodomy. Again, women can't have real sex with each other, so female homosexuality didn't really exist unless one of them was a hermaphrodite. This historical viewpoint we can also see in, for example, definitions of similar laws in the 1800s. Here, in the Criminal Amendment Act of 1885, we can see it's illegal to commit acts of gross indecency with male persons. Because lesbians couldn't really have sex, so it's not as threatening or serious. As we've moved forward, this extremely black and white viewpoint changed. Of course women can have sex. Just kidding. This historical Western viewpoint remains. The sexuality of men is the default, and society, in large, still struggles to comprehend desire without it. Desire without the phallus. Because without inviting Freud too much into this video, we cannot discuss lesbophobia without talking about one of the strongest heteronormative rules of love and relationship there is, that the only real sex is that of penetration. Only this interaction is validated and understood for the general Western society as a completed and real sexual act. It is from this fact that society creates relationship dynamics. These norms affect all relationships. It affects queer identities and is a major part in historical and modern-day homophobia for both men and women. Lesbians, both in reality and in popular culture, are allowed much more teenage experimentation. Lesbian teenage experimentation isn't threatening. We still trust them to take their role as heterosexual wives and mothers as adults, regardless of the faces they have as teens. That's lesbian infantilization. Bisexual women are often seen as heterosexual women faking it, and bisexual men often as gay men faking it. That's lesbian infantilization. Two women can hold hands in public. I mean, women can basically make out in public, and people will still assume they are sisters or best friends. That's lesbian infantilization. To circle this rant back into the important subjects you came here for, we see this in popular culture all the time.
You and her? It was just a phase.
Just a phase?
You had a sexy phase?
It meant nothing. I didn't think it would count. It meant nothing? I was just a little bi-curious.
You know, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't do enough experimenting in college. You're so weird.
I didn't have any of the experiences I set out to. Like travel, the bohemian art life, my big lesbian experience.
Bastard.
Oh, no. It was me. I kind of fooled around with his ex. I mean, you'd think that guys would dig that, right? What? It's college. It's expected.
In the French film, The Twilight Girls from 1957, this infantilization is basically the plot of the movie, and the reason it could get made in a time like the 50s. As YouTuber 100% Shipper, love that name, puts it,
pubescent girls exploring burgeoning sexuality in the safety of same-sex affection until the real men came along to sweep them up in perfectly heterosexual relationships.
I'm used to loves and hatreds among you girls. They're not forever. Now don't you cry over it. The few years you're here at Berlin are really just a short prologue to your life out there. Before you become the wives and mothers you will be, you are these mysterious, secretive little twilight girls.
But a more common and hidden consequence of lesbian infantilization in popular culture is that even when creators want to make good sapphic representation, it often feels kind of washed clean of desire. Due to society's inability to create sexual tension without a man and the dynamic that heterosexual mystery gives, and due to fear of creating a predatory and problematic lesbian, sapphic contemporary representation are lacking in sexual tension. Sapphics feel desire when they are in love. I chose between many expressions for this. Lesbian desexualization, lesbian castration, but I landed in infantilization because the core of this is the erasure of lesbianism as an adult, sexual and serious identity and sexuality. With infantilization, I mean both lesbianism being described as a phase you outgrow, but also that a lot of media struggle to create tension without a male sexuality, and therefore tension that neither feels relatable or interesting. This, to connect it back to this video's original theme, is creating problems in contemporary fandoms. Fandoms love sexual tension. Like, lesbian tension isn't impossible to create, but often even queer media just blindly missed the mark. Every single dyke felt the tension between Kristen Stewart and Aubrey Plaza in Happiest Season, but that wasn't who she ended up with. Every single dyke in fandom spaces loved the homoerotic tension between Jackie and Shauna in Yellow Jackets, but that wasn't the lesbian couple they focused on. Like, no one cared about these two. Like, are these examples on purpose? Did they put queer subtext in queer media? Or are creators just that blind to sapphic tension? When queers in fandoms say that FF stories are less engaging, I understand what they mean. That is the feeling. The problem is that when fandoms get too wrapped up in that feeling, they don't look for exceptions or try to create something different. Because just like all norms that rule our society, this isn't a one-way street where creators just don't get lesbians and therefore fans don't get anything to work with. Fans carry a long history of overlooking and ignoring female characters, judging female characters harder, and just overall carrying internalized misogyny and internalized lesbian infantilization. It's just not creators who struggle to create lesbian tension, fans struggle to pick it up. Female friendships are more intimate, both physically and emotionally, making it harder to pick up as homoerotic tension in media, and harder to explore in fanfiction. Many lesbians vocalize the difficulties this makes, both in popular culture and in reality, due to these blurred lines. Are we even dating? Is that girl flirting with me, or is she complimenting me? Are these two characters best friends, or do they actually wanna? All of this could make you depressed, and it really makes you wonder, is there hope for FF in fandoms? Here's the thing, I would like to say that FF is on the rise. I love statistics, like you didn't know, so let's look at Centreoftheselights fanfiction stats again. The 100 most popular pairings in fanfiction per year, not through all time. So in 2020, the list held 3 FF pairings, so did 2021. But 2022 held 6, and this year the list contained 8. What? Oh my god, 8 lesbian ships? Yeah, it is what it is, but we're not gonna beat misogyny overnight. It's a process. When discussing FF in fandom spaces, Tumblr, the majority of the voices are screaming about how people give all their energy to MM, which is true. But there is always some voice who wants to lift FF fandoms and how dedicated they are. This year, Tumblr held a tournament to decide the ship of all time, based on the mentioned statistics from AO3 taken out by Centreoftheselights. The creator of this tournament commented the lack of FF. While MM is definitely overrepresented in the AO3 stats, I don't think this is wholly representative of fandom. Even just looking at this bracket, round 4. Out of the 5 Femslash ships we started with, 4 of them have made it to this round, typically with wide margins and little competition. The user base here, on Tumblr that is very attached to the few lesbian couples we got, and I think many are trying to get these pairings as far as they can. This analysis on Tumblr is to some extent correct. It's not wholly representative of fandom. The top 100 list has been long in the making. Newer fandoms will take some time to work up to the same amount of fics as something that has been in the making since the start of AO3. Older ships like that of Gabrielle and Sina, their prime time was before AO3. But this list still makes for a good springing board for a contemporary fandom overview. But there are different kinds of fandoms. The ones you measure in the amount of fics, and the ones you measure by obsession. The aggressive, lesbian, and good representation. In 2019, Tamsin Muir released her debut book Gideon the Ninth, the first in the series The Locked Tube. It was followed by Harrow the Ninth in 2020 and Nona the Ninth in 2022. These books feature especially one ship, Gideon Harrow, or Griddlehark, but they are overall very sapphic. These books took over Tumblr in a way I have never, in my years on Tumblr, seen an FF ship do. They often trended on Tumblr's daily top 10 list. The book is the most discussed book on Tumblr in 2023, and they are currently at place 57 of the list of the most popular FF ships of all time on Archive of Our Own. Place 57 might not seem impressive, but they climbed 40 places in 1 year without any new book being released. That is also what makes Griddlehark to one if not the biggest lesbian ship at the moment. It continues to grow on its own. Their fans stick with them, even without new content. Like this comment on Tumblr says, "Every day those skeleton lesbians are on my dash, beating the shit out of each other or making out or playing Mario Kart. I don't even know what kind of media the locked tomb is." This comment is unique because it shows a specific type of internet presence. A kind of, I love this ship so much, I'm gonna make it your problem. And that's a type of internet presence usually reserved for MM. There are many reasons the Gideon Harrow ship is engaging. It's well written, they are both complex and difficult people, they have a toxic relationship, and they are unapologetically attracted to women. On top of this, the ship is a minor part of a larger story. The books are not a romance. Gideon and Harrow's relationship is one of many worked through storylines in a well-written world building. On the top 100 list of ships of all time, there is no ship that comes from the romance medium. Films, books, and TV shows that have romance as the center theme are not represented on this list. Fandom spaces are dominated by fantasy, sci-fi, anime, and so forth, often franchises and long-going mediums. By looking at Griddlehark as a ship and the popularity of the locked tomb, we can see tendencies that are appreciated in fandom spaces today. I call her, this new lesbian arising, the aggressive lesbian. Earlier I talked about the AO3 top ship bracket. A similar tournament, but with only the top 100 lesbian ships, took place in the later half of 2023, the AO3 Femslash Top 100 tournament. The top 4 ships were Gideon Harrow, Teresi Vriska from Homestuck, Ivy Harley from DC, and Faith Buffy from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The red thread with all of these relationships and the Sapphic characters is that they have, just like I mentioned with Griddlehark, dubious morals and aggressive tendencies. They are complex and flawed characters, often in questionable relationships, and they are relationships that take place in a larger world with other stories than that specific romance. The fan favorite show Our Flag Means Death is most famous for its MM romances, but in the second season the show explored and made space for sapphic relationships. The show, which is very queer and also very attentive to fandoms, knew how to handle these sapphics in a way that would do a home run within their already queer demographic. Those mental lesbians in episode 4 managed to portray a unique and interesting fictional relationship that, in my opinion, felt more authentically queer than the entire seasons of Jello Jackets. I was like, finally some authentic lesbian representation.
What a thing. Huh? On your shoulder.
Oh, fuck me. Annie put it in there, Annie can take it out.
Oh, you want me to take it out now, do you?
Oh, is there a fucking echo in the room, is there?
Flick it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Flick it.
Oh.
How's that?
No, just kidding. But also not kidding. As mentioned, one of the issues with lesbian representation today is that they often lack the foundation that makes people obsessed. A great ship needs to be more than two people falling in love. It needs to have a captivating dynamic. Fandoms also don't mind if they sprinkle it with a little power unbalance, forbidden love, or codependency. I call this specific lesbian characterization aggressive because usually she is, literally, so it's suiting. But she's also aggressive in the way she's not scared of being read as villainous or predatory. She's not written to be liked by everybody, and that's what makes her into good representation. In this category, I would also put Killing Eve, Arcane, Last of Us, and Bottoms. Arcane, in the way it portrays Vi as a lesbian thirst trap and builds up the tension in her forbidden love story with Cop, Caitlyn. Killing Eve, before, the last season happened, like the idea of Killing Eve, in the way they built up a relationship on red flags and hatred. The Last of Us, in the way it lets Ellie feel and act on same-sex attraction, even though she is so young. Her feelings are taken seriously, something very rare for lesbian teens. Bottoms in the way it lets its female characters be horny and objectifying losers. The thing with all of these characters, apart from the fact that they have attitude and are always ready to strike a bitch down, is that they are 1. Well written, and 2. Do not fall into the trap of being either sexualized or infantilized. Their identities as lesbians stand on their own, and they are, by their creators, taken seriously in that sexuality. The director of Bottoms, Emma Seligman, literally said to the magazine that the only queer representation I've seen on screen had been tame and sweet. I just wanted to see shitty gay characters. As mentioned, Sapphic representation today suffers from the way it tries so hard not to be problematic. With a history of sexualization, infantilization, and narrative punishment, lesbians today often feel too morally correct. To quote this interaction in my comment field on another video, maybe this is just me, but I find love stories really uninteresting if there isn't some kind of taboo about it. I mean, that's why people love Romeo and Juliet so much, right? I don't know, I generally find romance dull without that forbidden spice. It's part of why, despite being married to a woman, I find lesbian porn so boring. It's also mutual and kind, and it isn't fucked up or dangerous. And then this other bitch comes in and says, did you genuinely just say you don't like women loving women because it's not fucked up and dangerous? Yes! That is what she's saying, and she is right. And large parts of fandoms agree with her. The popularity of Griddlehark shows that. That Buffy/Faith is more popular than Will or Tara today shows that. What I would like to say to her though is that you can get fucked up lesbians. Or if not fucked up, then at least relationships that doesn't feel like a Christmas rom-com. This specific genre of lesbian, the aggressive lesbian, isn't the only one worth portraying, and I'm not saying that other characterizations aren't necessary. I really liked Tara and Darcy in Heartstopper, for example, but good representation is broad representation. It's dangerous to think that all minority representation has to cater to everyone in that group, or as a lot of lesbians has been portrayed, catered to everybody. That will make for cliches and satisfy no one. Representation ought to be judged on the company and time that it's in. For example, Heartstopper is great MM representation because it shows gay men who don't have sex. That is great representation because gay men are overrepresented as being obsessed with sex. Bottoms is great lesbian representation because it shows lesbians who are obsessed with sex. That's great representation because lesbians are overrepresented as only wanting to have sex when they are in love and everything is wholesome. You get what I mean? Another kind of media with men having aggressive hate sex outside because they cannot control their desire would be unremarkable. A similar scene with lesbians would be extraordinary. The lack of lesbians hate fucking in the mud might seem like a humoristic take, but the lack of lesbians hate fucking in the mud shows exactly what is lacking in lesbian representation. Gay men have a wide variety as representation goes. In the 2010s, we saw a trend of criminal gay men. We are now in the 2020s seeing a trend of older gay men. All of this is great because it shows a wide variety of media. For enjoyers of FF media, there are more gaps in representation. Older lesbians, who are just not mothers, are underrepresented. The lesbian villain is underrepresented. The horny lesbian is underrepresented. But the lack of horny villain lesbians are a shame for fandoms especially, since horny villains are greatly popular in fandoms. Think what you may of that, but fiction for many people is a safe space to explore and enjoy problematic dynamics. Problematic dynamics like Caitlyn being a cop, buying Vi out of prison, Harrow's family literally owning Gideon as a slave, and the fact that one of these bitches tried to kill or did kill the other are popular in fandom. Many of the actual worked-through FF couples in mainstream media today, with worked through I mean characters that run through several seasons, they are children's animations, like Adventure Time, Owl House, She-Ra and Steven Universe. Lesbians are actually overrepresented in children's animation compared to male gay representation. YouTuber Blue Order raises this in his video.
Series finale, a lesbian couple between two characters, Enid and Red Action, are granted an on-screen kiss and a canon establishment to their relationship. However, two male characters, Lord Boxman and Professor Venomous, are discreetly hinted to be married, as both characters are shown wearing matching wedding rings, in separate shots. This notion that one type of LGBT relationship can be shown front and center while another one has to be discreetly hidden in order to pass censors, that exposes a double standard in this whole field of representation.
The overrepresentation of FF in animation is interesting. It's great that lesbian representation is accepted enough to be shown in children's media and is allowed this visibility. At the same time, when looking at, for example, the mentioned Femslash shipwreck on Tumblr, many rounds looked like this. Which also started a discourse in the fandom. Like, what is this? The most popular lesbian ships of all time, and this is what we get. But the problem isn't that this is bad representation. It's not. She-Ra and the Owl House are some of the biggest FF fandoms online. They have vocal and active communities. Both of them are on the list of the 100 most popular ships of all time on Archive of Our Own, placed 96 and 97. Steven Universe has a really big and Sapphic dominated fandom. People love them. Again, if we are to talk about good and bad rep, we have to do so in comparison with other representations. Are we getting a broad and are we getting unique representation? It can coexist that while Owl House is fantastic representation, it's also a shame for queer people that don't watch children's animation that the majority of popular ships look like this. In this chapter, I wanted to highlight the Canon suffix we have today that also are popular in queer fandom spaces. While children's animation have been the former common ground for canon representation in queer fandoms, I now see a trend of another type of dyke. I see this aggressive lesbian as a step in the right direction for representation overall, and its popularity in fandom as a sign that fans see her and take her to their hearts. Before going into the next chapter, just so no one will sue me, and so I feel I've said what needed to be said about contemporary Sapphic representation, I didn't mention Avatrice from Warrior Nun in this chapter, even though they are canon and huge in fandom, simply because I focused in this chapter on the trend of the aggressive lesbian, and they both seem too nice, but full disclosure, I'm sorry lesbian gods, I haven't seen Warrior Nun. But I still want to end this chapter with a shout out to the FF fans that made a new production company pick it up after its cancellation last year. That, if anything, shows a large FF fandom. The importance of non-canon lesbians. In Tumblr's Years in Review, the fandom metrics, we could see that one FF ship made the cut of top 5 most popular ships of 2023, Wednesday and Erin from Wednesday. In 2022, one of the largest FF ships, according to the fandom metrics, were Robin and Nancy from Stranger Things. Stranger Things was by far the biggest fandom of 2022, and still are, maybe. Even though Robin as a character spoke to a lot of people when she came out, her love story left everyone unaffected. But the popularity of Nancy as a ship shows a positive trend in fandom communities where Femslash fans took that in their own hands, ignoring Becky and pairing Robin up with someone else. Fandom's tendencies to create original stories can clearly be seen in the way fandoms sometimes make up their own universe and characters. This is, unsurprisingly, most common with MM. The 8th most popular pairing of all time on Archive of Our Own is Sirius Black and Remus Lupin from Harry Potter. Not as the adults in the source material, but as teens in what in the fandom is called the Marauders era. This fan-made Harry Potter spin-off is huge. And today, in that spin-off, Sirius and Remus are always a couple. This way of picking up minor characters and creating a whole world with MM in focus is common in fandoms. In 2023, the 22nd most popular ships of Archive of Our Own, with over 3,000 fics being written that year, was Marlene McKinnon / Dorcas Meadows from Harry Potter. You're like, who the fuck are they? Well, I'ma tell you who they are. By reading out of Wikipedia. Marlene McKinnon and Dorcas Meadows were both members of the original First War Order of the Phoenix.
Marlene McKinnon. She was killed 2 weeks after this was taken.
So that's one of them. And Mad-Eye Moody showed Harry Potter a group photo of the First Order of the Phoenix that included Dorcas. And that's the other one. Now you're like, what is this? She's just name-dropping Femslash. Yeah. That's what I'm doing in this chapter. Popular ships with large fandoms that weren't defined or erased for their lack of canon confirmation. Lesbian ships like Marlene McKinnon and Dorcas Meadows, made from nothing simply to create a lesbian ship into a popular fandom, is interesting because it shows a tendency usually reserved for MM. What I would like to highlight with this quite short chapter is the existence of these non-canon pairs in fandoms and their importance. When people discuss the lack of FF, they usually talk about how people ignore not only the canon FF couples, but the possibility of non-canon ones. There was a discourse on Tumblr following the release of House of the Dragon, with people rioting over the fact that Rhaenyra / Alicent didn't get as much hype as a ship as they deserved. Considering the power dynamic and obvious homoeroticism, popular things on Tumblr, the critique were directed at fandoms as a whole. If they were men, you would be feral. This isn't incorrect. For reference, Aemon / Lucerys has more fanfic than Rhaenysent. A prime example of MM favoritism. Like, if Rhaenysents were men, people would go feral. This is a fact. There is no other explanation here than the fact that people are not as interested because they are women. But the discussion surrounding the misogyny in the lack of Rhaenysent were very present. And Rhaenysent, even though the ship is small, the shippers are passionate. Even though Aemon Lucerys has more fanfiction, Rhaenysent has a much more passionate fan group. Aemon Lucerys was very popular in the release of the show, and many people watched that and wrote fanfiction about them, but they haven't stayed on as a popular couple in queer communities as Tumblr. Rhaenysent is more present today than Aemon Lucerys has ever been. Both canon ships and non-canon ships are fundamental if FF are to grow. The popularity of Marlene Dorcas, Ronancy, and Erin Wednesday shows that there is a capability to grow these kind of ships even without canon interference or queer subtext. In my MM video, people lifted the fact that talking about queer fandoms and not lifting the FF ones that do exist is unfair. And I agree. Change starts with us. Summary and final discussion. To summarize, the lesbian in popular culture has often met a deadly fate. She has been killed off for shock value or in modern day cancelled due to low viewership. In the early 2000s, she was most known for her sexy appeal and created for the male gaze. Today, as creators are scared to kill her, make her too sexy or make her a predator, she's often reduced to an inexperienced femme who won't upset anyone. None of these portrayals feel catered to her actual demographic, Sapphic viewers. As society is taunted by the norm of male sexuality as the active sexuality and penetration as the only real sex, lesbians have historically and in popular culture been erased. This still remains, even though queer fandom spaces like Tumblr and Archive of Our Own are dominated by bisexual women, asexual women, and queers. All of this is internalized in the Sapphic community, who have a long history of ignoring female characters. But we have to judge situations based on the times that we're in. Fandom communities have created a trend of MM in over 80 years. It will take time before we see major changes. The popularity of non-canon ships are vital to fandom communities, and even though it's not as common in FF communities, it does occur. FF fans are fucking fighting to make MM-dominated fandoms like Stranger Things and the Marados era more lesbian by creating their own interesting FF ships. There are several loud and active FF fandoms online today, especially the book series The Locked Tomb, which continues to grow even without new media. The fandom are constantly vocalizing the effortless and authentic lesbian representation the book holds, and the ship, with its crazy obsession and complex characterization, fits into many aspects of what seems to be popular Sapphic rap on queer fandom spaces, such as Tumblr today. Saphics today want to see lesbians that are allowed to be secure in their lesbianity and have a well thought out, complex, and often problematic personality. I call this new lesbian the aggressive lesbian because she feels catered to queer viewers, or at least not censored as to not offend anyone. She's important for that reason, but she's also important because she fills a hole in lesbian representation who otherwise feels like it's stagnated. I think it's important to see that 5% of the most popular ships in fanfictions are lesbians and 66% are gay men, and ask, why is that? I think it's important to see that all MM remakes of Scum were hugely popular and the FF versions were ignored. Red, White and Royal Blue were praised and First Kill laughed upon, showing that often it's not about the story per se or the amount of cringe. It's only about the fact that fans don't care for women. But I also think it's interesting to ask if you, as a queer woman or queer person attracted to women, owe it to give FF a chance. Where is the line between preference and social accountability? There is a difference between MM fetishizing and preferring MM ships. There's a difference between talking shit about an FF couple and just not being intrigued to write fanfiction about them. Whose responsibility is it to lift FF? If you are a queer person consuming mostly MM, no one is forcing you to stop or overnight start to enjoy FF in equal measure. But maybe you can look at the MM you enjoy and try to pinpoint what about that it is you like. There are difficulties going forward. Misogyny and lesbophobia are real issues. The lesbian episode of The Last of Us has the lowest rating of them all. That's not because it's the worst episode. But this would be a positive video, right? I felt the last years that there is a discourse in fandom spaces about this uneven distribution, and there is a will to praise and lift FF. Many female characters are ignored, and while the voices are small, there are always voices who criticize that. But above all, finally, there are more lesbians who cater to my needs. And that mental chick in my comment field. Equality means toxic bitches for all. I hope that you enjoyed or was provoked by this video. If you did, I would like a subscription. It means the world for the algorithm and for me. I will never buy new technology with under 10,000 subscribers, so we all have to suffer, I guess. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you around eventually.